Welcome to my Commander Decks for Beginners series, where I take a legendary creature and I build a commander deck around it with a super straightforward game plan using cards that are low on text and easy to understand. Today, by subscriber request, we've got Sliver Hivelord. Now, before we start, I want to say this is on the high side of difficulty for what I would consider a beginner deck. That's for two reasons. One, this is a 5-color deck, so it can be tough to get your mana right. And two, has to do with how much stuff you have to keep track of. Because slivers are a really unique and exciting creature type. Each one you have out gives all slivers you control some type of ability. For example, Megantic Sliver gives all slivers you control, including itself, +3/+3. And Gale Rider Sliver gives slivers you control flying, which means they can't be blocked except by other creatures with flying or reach. So as you can see, the more slivers you get out, the better your slivers all get. But you do have to keep track of it all. Alright, now let's talk about our commander. Sliver Hivelord costs white, blue, black, red, green, and is a 5/5 legendary creature sliver. It says, sliver creatures you control have indestructible. Damage and effects that say destroy, don't destroy them. That means that spells that say like destroy target creature or destroy all creatures won't work. Same goes for damage-based spells like this. But it also means they can't die in combat. So if they block an attacker, they won't die. Or if they attack and they are blocked, they won't die. And because this deck is trying to win with combat damage, it's trying to win by attacking your opponents over and over, this is huge for our deck. There are still some ways our opponents can get rid of our slivers. They can still get exiled, or they can still die from having their toughness minused to 0. They can be sacrificed, they can get turned into other things, or put back into our library, or some other ways. Now let's check out all the slivers in the deck. We've got 12 slivers that increase the power and or toughness of slivers we control. Don't forget that like all slivers, they give themselves that bonus too. Then we've got some slivers that make it easier for us to get combat damage in, like Shifting Sliver. Slivers can't be blocked except by slivers. Battering Sliver and Groundshaker Sliver give slivers trample. That means if a sliver you control would assign enough combat damage to its blockers to destroy them, you may have it assign the rest of its damage to the defending player or planeswalker. For example, if a 5/5 trampler is attacking and is blocked by a 2/2, 2 damage is enough to kill the 2/2, and the remaining 3 is dealt to the player you're attacking. I already mentioned Gale Rider Sliver, which gives slivers you control flying, but we've got 3 more options that give slivers flying because it is really important we get through that combat damage. Pulmonic Sliver also says all slivers have, if this permanent would be put into a graveyard, you may put it on top of its owner's library instead. Usually that ability is not as good as indestructible, of course, but you know, if you don't have your commander out, this is a good backup plan if they remove your stuff. At least eventually you can get back your key slivers this way. Cloud Shredder Sliver gives flying and haste. Haste means that a creature can attack the turn it enters the battlefield. We've got 2 more haste givers with Blur Sliver and Heart Sliver, because this is a pretty important ability for an aggressive deck like ours. Heart Sliver actually says all slivers are unaffected by summoning sickness. That's just the old wording. This is actually just haste. Siphon Sliver gives slivers lifelink. That means damage dealt by a sliver creature you control also causes you to gain that much life. Venom Sliver gives slivers death touch. That means any amount of damage it deals to another creature will be enough to destroy it. For example, if Venom Sliver is attacking and it's blocked by this 5/5, normally a 5/5 would beat a 1/1 and the 5/5 would live. But with death touch, that 1 damage is enough to kill the 5/5 and they both die. Spiteful Sliver says, sliver creatures you control have, whenever this creature is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target player or planeswalker. This makes combat real frustrating for your opponents. They have a hard time attacking into your board, and they have a hard time blocking your creatures too. If they do, they might be taking a whole bunch of damage. Striking Sliver gives slivers you control first strike. That means they deal combat damage before creatures without first strike. For example, if your 1/1 sliver is attacking and they block with a 1/1, normally they would both die, but in this case, your sliver deals 1 damage to their 1 toughness and kills them before they have a chance to deal any damage to yours. Fury Sliver and Bone Scythe Sliver give slivers you control double strike. That means when they attack or block, they deal first strike damage, like the previous creature, but after that they also deal regular damage. For example, if Bone Scythe Sliver is attacking and this 4/4 is blocking it, first it will deal 2 first strike damage and the opponent's creature won't deal anything to it. Then the regular strike damage will happen at the same time. It'll deal 2 more damage to the opponent's creature, and the opponent's creature will deal 4 damage to it, and they will both die. If instead it attacks and isn't blocked, it's going to deal 2 damage twice directly to your opponent. Sentinel Sliver gives slivers vigilance. That means attacking doesn't cause them to tap. Mostly this means you're free to attack with them on your turn, and they'll still be untapped so you can block with them on an opponent's turn. We've got 2 cards that create Sliver tokens. Brood Sliver says whenever a Sliver deals combat damage to a player, its controller may create a 1/1 colorless Sliver creature token. And Hive Stirrings is a sorcery that creates 2 1/1 colorless Sliver tokens. Next, we've got a couple ways of protecting our Slivers. Diffusion Sliver says, whenever a Sliver you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell or ability unless its controller pays 2. So if they try to kill a Sliver with something like Murder and they can't pay the extra 2, the spell is countered and it doesn't work. Crypt Sliver says all creatures have tap, regenerate target creature. Regenerate is kind of similar to Indestructible. It means the next time this permanent would be destroyed this turn, it isn't. Instead, tap it and remove all damage from it and remove it from combat. Our commander is generally better than either of these at saving our creatures from removal and combat damage and stuff, but if we don't have our commander out, these are a good backup plan that can help save our creatures. Let's move on to removal, that is, cards that destroy stuff. Doomblade, Mortify, and Flame Slash can all deal with your opponent's creatures, as well as Necrotic Sliver. All Slivers have pay 3, sacrifice this permanent, destroy target permanent. We also have 5 cards that destroy multiple creatures at once, often called Wraths. Day of Judgment, Sublime Exaltation, and Shatter the Sky all destroy all creatures. Dune Blast says choose up to 1 creature, destroy the rest. These Wraths are especially great for this deck because our commander gives our creatures indestructible. If our commander's out when we cast these, our creatures don't die, theirs do. There's also Crippling Fear, choose a creature type. Creatures that aren't of the chosen type get -3/-3 till end of turn. Obviously we choose Slivers, so none of ours are going to die. Next up is card draw. Card draw is super important in a commander deck. We've got some basic ones here, and we've got some ones that are Slivers that draw us cards. Synapse Sliver says whenever a Sliver deals combat damage to a player, its controller may draw a card. Opaline Sliver. All Slivers have, whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. Capricious Sliver. Sliver creatures you control have, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of your library. You may play the card this turn. Note that you do have to pay the cost. Still, you don't get to play it for free, but for that turn, you kind of draw the card. Memnotic Sliver. Each Sliver gains pay 2, sacrifice this creature, draw a card. And Hollowhead Sliver. Sliver creatures you control have tap, discard this card, draw a card. This one isn't card advantage really, you're trading one card for another, but it's still good. Mana ramp is equally important. It means cards that get you ahead on mana and a lot of times fix your mana. Super important with a 5-color deck. There's 10 ramp cards in the deck, but the most notable ones are Gemhide Sliver and Mana Weft Sliver, which say all creatures have tap, add 1 mana of any color. And Chromatic Lantern, an artifact that says lands you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color, and it taps for mana itself. This automatically fixes your mana. It's great for a budget 5-color deck like this. There's lots of great options for upgrading this deck. There's a bunch of Slivers I couldn't include because of difficulty, but also because of cost. Sliver Legion, for example, gives Slivers you control +1/+1 for each other Sliver on the battlefield. This card costs almost as much as the whole deck, but dang is it good. Upgrading the lands is also a great option. Quite a few of our lands come into play tapped, which slows us down, and if we can upgrade those out to more expensive ones, that speeds up the deck a lot. If you like the idea of this deck, but you want something a little simpler, why not check out my Kranko deck, which focuses on the Goblin creature type. It's very cheap, very explosive, and very fun. Or my Ghalta commander deck, focused on really high power creatures, including Ghalta himself, which is a 12/12 with trample. Thanks a bunch for watching, hit that like button if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.